I thought I was building a life with the woman I loved, but the whole foundation was a lie she told before we even got serious. By the time the truth came out at a party in front of everyone we knew, she had already burned every bridge she had left. I found out the truth at a house party on a Saturday night in October, in front of 12 people I knew and 4 I didn't, while holding a drink I hadn't even started yet. That's the version everyone remembers. That's the version that got retold, dissected, and passed around our friend group like a game of broken telephone for the next 2 months. But nobody knows what came before that night. Nobody knows how long I had been standing on ground that was already crumbling underneath me. So let me back up. Her name was Dara. We met through a mutual friend at a rooftop gathering almost 2 years before all of this went sideways. She was funny in that dry, deadpan way that takes you off guard. She had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room she actually wanted to talk to. I fell for it completely. Most people did. I was 28 when we met. I had just come out of a situation with someone else that I wouldn't even call a real relationship, more like 8 months of mutual confusion and poor communication that eventually dissolved without any real conversation. I was tired of that. I told Dara early on, like embarrassingly early, that I wasn't interested in something casual. I said it almost apologetically, like I was warning her off. I told her I was at a point where I either wanted something that was going somewhere, or I didn't want to deal with the emotional overhead at all. She said she felt the same way. She said she was done with situationships and games. She said she wanted something real too. I believed her. I had no reason not to. We started spending a lot of time together. Within 6 weeks, it was pretty much established that we were a couple, even though we never had one of those formal DTR conversations. It just kind of became understood. She started leaving things at my apartment. I started being included in plans she made with her friends. We met each other's families around the 3-month mark. Everything seemed to be tracking in the right direction. My best friend Marcus had one opinion from almost the beginning, and he never really changed it. He pulled me aside about 2 months in and said, "She's charming, man, but just watch how she handles anything she doesn't want to deal with." I asked him what he meant. He said he had noticed that whenever something came up that required a real conversation, money, plans, logistics, anything with stakes, she found a way to redirect it without actually engaging. He said she was good at making her preferences into everyone else's idea. I told him he was being paranoid. He let it go. But I filed it somewhere. Marcus is the kind of person who notices things before other people do. He's not pessimistic. He's not one of those guys who hates everyone his friends date on principle. He's just perceptive. So even though I didn't want to hear it at the time, I tucked what he said into the back of my mind. Dara didn't work a traditional job. She was doing freelance graphic design work, which she was genuinely talented at, but the income was inconsistent. Some months she made decent money. Other months she made almost nothing. Early in our relationship, this wasn't something we had to navigate together because we were still in that phase where everything is light and fun and you're just enjoying each other's company. But as things got more serious, the financial asymmetry became something we lived with every day. I had a stable job in software project management. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well and it was consistent. I wasn't rich, but I had savings, I paid my rent on time, and I didn't stress about money in the way that grinds a person down. Dara had good months and bad months, and as we got closer, the bad months started becoming my problem to absorb. I want to be clear here, I didn't resent helping her. At least not at first. When you care about someone and you're in a committed relationship, you cover for each other sometimes. That's part of being a team. I paid for dinners when she was tight. I covered her half of the hotel when we traveled. I picked up the groceries more often than not. I did these things because I wanted to, and I told myself that was what partnership looked like. What I didn't realize, until much later, was that she resented me for it. Not because I did anything wrong, but because the dynamic made her feel indebted, and instead of sitting with that discomfort and working through it, she translated it into something ugly. She started framing the financial imbalance as me having power over her. She started making small comments, saying I acted like my opinions mattered more because I earned more. Saying that when I disagreed with a decision she wanted to make, it was because I thought my money gave me veto power. I was confused by this for a long time, because I wasn't the one pushing my opinions into every corner of our life. She was. She decided where we went for dinner always. She decided how we spent our weekends always. She decided which couple friends we maintained friendships with, which events were worth going to, which of my friends she liked, and which ones she had a quiet, ongoing problem with. She made these decisions casually, as if they were just happening, as if it was mutually agreed upon. And she framed all of it as partnership, as equality, as two people building a shared life together. But it was only equal when she was the one making the choices. The moment I pushed back on something, even politely, even with a good reason, she positioned it as me trying to control her. She had this ability to flip the frame so fast it made your head spin. I'd say I wanted to spend the holidays with my family instead of driving 4 hours to see her college friends, and suddenly I was dominating the relationship. I'd say I wasn't comfortable with how much we were spending on a vacation we hadn't budgeted for, and suddenly I was using money as a weapon. Looking back, I can see the pattern clearly. At the time, I just felt perpetually off balance. The pregnancy scare happened about 9 months into the relationship. Or what I thought was a pregnancy scare. We had talked about birth control early on in a responsible adult way. She told me she was on the pill. She'd been on it for years, she said. It was just part of her routine. I took her at her word. We stopped using condoms at some point in the first few months, which felt normal for a serious monogamous relationship. So when she told me she might be pregnant, my stomach dropped. We weren't anywhere near ready for a child. We weren't living together. Our financial situation, specifically hers, was not stable. I was not opposed to having kids someday, but someday felt very far from where we were. She took a test. It came back negative. We both exhaled. But here's the thing. Something shifted in her after that. Not dramatically. Subtly. She became a little more clingy, a little more insistent on labels and timelines. She started bringing up moving in together with more urgency. She started making comments about our future that had more pressure behind them than before. I noticed it, but I chalked it up to the scare rattling her. It rattled me too, in a different way. I thought she was just processing. What I did not know, what I would not know for over a year, was that she had gone off the pill 3 months before that scare. She hadn't said anything to me. She just stopped taking it and kept letting me believe she was still on it. The pregnancy scare wasn't a fluke. It wasn't bad luck. She had manufactured the conditions for it. She told me this herself, eventually. That's the part that still sits weird in my stomach. She didn't get caught. She confessed. But the timing and context of that confession were not what you'd call a sincere reckoning. She told me at the party. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The 13 months between the pregnancy scare and the party were not uniformly bad. There were genuinely good stretches. There were weekends where everything felt effortless, and I remembered why I had felt so certain about her in the first place. There were conversations that went deep and felt honest. There were moments where I thought we were figuring it out. But the red flags kept coming. They just came slowly enough that I kept adjusting to each new normal before the next one arrived. She started spending a lot of time with a guy named Corey who was in her extended friend circle. She mentioned him casually at first, then more frequently. Corey said this. Corey recommended that. Corey was coming to this thing we were going to. I didn't feel jealous so much as I felt something off, the way you feel when a draft is coming from somewhere in the room, but you can't find the source. I mentioned it to her once. I said I'd noticed she talked about Corey a lot, and I just wanted to check in about it. No accusation, just a conversation. She looked at me like I had said something embarrassing. She said Corey was just a friend, and that if I had insecurity issues maybe, I should think about why that was. She said she wasn't going to apologize for having male friends just because I felt threatened. I backed down immediately. I apologized. I said I trusted her, and I didn't want her to feel like I was monitoring her friendships. She accepted the apology and moved on. But I noticed she stopped mentioning Corey after that, which is its own kind of answer. Marcus saw what was happening from a distance. He didn't press me on it because he knew I wasn't ready to hear it, but he also didn't pretend things were fine. He would just ask how I was doing in a way that made clear he already suspected the answer. I told him things were complicated. He said that was a generous word for it. The money stuff escalated around month 15. She had a dry spell with her freelance work. 3 months of almost nothing coming in. During that time, I covered almost all of our shared expenses: groceries, utilities, her half of trips we took, a medical bill she had, her phone plan when she fell behind on it. I did all of this without being asked most of the time, because I could see she was struggling and I didn't want to make it worse. What she heard in all of that was control. She told me later, during a fight about something unrelated, that she felt like she owed me and that it made her feel like she had no agency in the relationship. I was floored. I said I had never held any of it over her head, not once. She said it didn't matter if I said the words out loud, the power dynamic was there regardless. I think some part of her believed that. I think the shame of depending on someone financially is genuinely corrosive, and she was dealing with it badly. But the way she dealt with it was to resent me for the position she was in, as if I had put her there. As if I had taken away her options. When in reality, I was just the person standing there trying to help her stay afloat while she figured it out. She started taking shots at me in front of friends. Little ones. Jokes that weren't quite jokes. Comments about how I liked things a certain way, delivered with just enough edge that everyone could hear the subtext. I would laugh it off in the moment and then feel the bruise of it later. I should have said something. I should have said, "Hey, that hurt and I need you to stop doing that." But I kept telling myself I was being too sensitive. I kept telling myself that couples needle each other and it didn't mean anything. Looking back, that was the moment I should have walked away. Not because of the needling specifically, but because I was already minimizing things to myself to keep the peace. You can't build anything solid on a foundation of minimizing. The party was at a friend's place named Joel. Joel and his girlfriend Priya hosted these gatherings a few times a year, always low-key, always the same mix of people who had been loosely orbiting the same social circle for years. I liked these parties. They felt easy. I knew almost everyone there. Dara and I drove there together. She was quiet in the car in a way that wasn't relaxed quiet, it was tense quiet. I asked her if she was okay. She said she was fine. I didn't push. We got there and separated pretty quickly, which wasn't unusual. She went to find her friends. I went to find Marcus, who was already in the kitchen with a beer and a posture that said he had been waiting for me. He said he needed to tell me something. He said he had found out through someone at the party that Dara and Corey had been sleeping together. He didn't know for how long. He said he had heard it from someone he trusted, who had heard it directly from a member of Corey's friend group, who apparently had no idea that keeping it quiet was something anyone expected. I remember the specific feeling of that moment. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't like a bomb going off. It was quieter and heavier than that. Like something I had already half suspected being handed to me fully formed. I told Marcus I needed a minute. He said to take whatever I needed and that he wasn't going anywhere. I stood in the kitchen for a little while. I drank my drink. I thought about leaving. I thought about confronting her privately somewhere in the house. I thought about just getting back in the car and driving home and dealing with it later. I don't know exactly what made me walk into the living room instead. She was on the couch with a few of our mutual friends, laughing at something. She looked relaxed. She looked like someone without a thing on her conscience. And something about that, the ease of it, the total lack of any visible weight, made me stop performing. I said her name. She looked up, smiled. I said, "Can we talk?" She said, "We can talk here, what's up?" That was a mistake on her part. Or maybe she said it on purpose. Maybe she was daring me, I don't know. But she said it in front of 4 or 5 people, casually, like whatever I had to say couldn't possibly be anything that would change the temperature of the room. I said, "Are you and Corey sleeping together?" The room went quiet immediately, not gradually, all at once. She stared at me. I watched her run through about 3 different responses in 2 seconds. I saw her land on a fence. She said, "I can't believe you would bring that up here. This is exactly why." I said, "Just answer the question." She said, "You're embarrassing yourself." I said, "You can answer it in private or you can answer it here, but you're going to answer it." There was a long pause, and then something shifted in her face. Not regret exactly. More like the calculation of someone who realizes their exit routes are narrowing. She looked around the room, at people we both knew, people who were now watching with the specific discomfort of people who very much do not want to be in the room, but also cannot make themselves leave. She said, "Yes, okay, yes." Someone inhaled sharply, I don't know who. She said, "And I was going to tell you. I've been trying to find the right time. This isn't how this was supposed to go." I said, "When did it start?" She said that wasn't relevant. I said, "When did it start, Dara?" She said about 4 months ago. She said it wasn't what I was thinking. She said she and I had been in a bad place, and she needed something that felt like she had a choice in. I almost laughed at that, not because it was funny, because the audacity of that framing, in that moment, in front of all those people, was almost impressive. I said, "You needed something that felt like a choice, so your solution was to lie to me for 4 months." She said, "You've been controlling every aspect of my life with your money, and your opinions, and your..." I said, "I need to ask you something else." She stopped. I said, "Did you go off the pill without telling me, before the pregnancy scare?" And here is the part I still cannot fully explain. The part that makes the least sense when I try to understand her as a rational person. She looked at the room. She looked at me. And she said yes. She said it like she had been waiting to say it. Like she had been carrying it and was ready to put it down. Like the confession itself was a relief she deserved. She said she had been scared I wasn't as committed as she needed me to be, and she thought if things got more serious I would step up. She said she didn't go through with it. She said the negative test was real. But yes, she had taken herself off the pill without saying anything because she wanted to test where my head was. I said, "You tried to get pregnant to trap me in this relationship." She said, "That's not how I'd put it." I said, "How would you put it?" She didn't answer. I said, "I'm done." I left my drink on Joel's coffee table. I found Marcus in the kitchen where I'd left him. He took one look at my face and grabbed his jacket. We left. She didn't follow me out. I sat in Marcus's car in the parking structure a few blocks away for about 40 minutes. I didn't cry, I just sat there. Marcus didn't say much. He didn't say "I told you so," which I appreciate more now than I did in the moment because I know how badly some part of him wanted to. He just sat there with me and let me stare at nothing. He said, eventually, "What do you need right now?" I said I didn't know. He said, "Then we'll figure it out." The night of the party, Corey found out what Dara had confessed to the room. I don't know exactly how quickly it spread, but by the next morning it was apparently everywhere in the social circle. Corey, who had apparently had no idea that any of this was going on behind a more complex story than he'd been told, ended things with her immediately. I found that out through a friend of a friend about a week later. I don't know what Corey had been told about her relationship status or what she had promised him. I don't know if he thought he was the secret or if she had sold him some other version of the situation. But whatever she had given him to justify what they were doing, finding out the full truth in the way he did was apparently enough for him to walk away the same night. So she lost both of us in the same night, in the same room, in front of people we all knew. I want to be honest about the weeks that followed because they were not clean or triumphant. I did not feel vindicated. I did not feel powerful. I felt gutted and stupid and very tired. She texted me for the first 3 days after the party. Not long texts, but persistent ones. She said she wanted to explain in person. She said the party version of events didn't capture everything. She said I had a right to be angry, but I was walking away from 2 years without even trying to understand her side. I read every message. I didn't respond to any of them. My friends asked me how I was doing with a frequency that let me know they were worried. I gave everyone the same short answer: "I'm processing, I'll be okay. Give me time." It was only partially true. Marcus came by about a week in with dinner. He sat across from me at my kitchen table and let me talk without steering the conversation anywhere. I went through the whole thing: the pill, the money, the way she had framed my help as control, the way she had made me feel like I was the problem in a situation she had engineered. He listened to all of it. He didn't editorialize. He just nodded and refilled my glass when it got low. At some point I said, "How did you see it before I did?" He said, "I didn't see this specifically. I just saw that she never had to compromise. I saw that every time you two landed in the same place, it was always on her terms. That's not the same as seeing this." I said, "You tried to tell me." He said, "You weren't ready to hear it. That's not a knock on you, that's just how it works sometimes." I asked him if he thought she had ever actually loved me. He said that was the wrong question. He said he thought she had wanted me for what it felt like to have me, stable, present, reliable, but that she had never figured out how to be in a relationship with someone like that without turning it into a power struggle in her own head. He said some people can't receive care without resenting it. He said that wasn't a moral failing exactly, it was just something that makes certain people very hard to love without losing yourself. That landed somewhere useful. The financial stuff had some actual practical consequences that I had to deal with in the weeks after. She had been on my phone plan as a secondary line. I removed her from it. She had a key to my apartment. I had the locks changed, which felt dramatic but necessary. There were some shared streaming subscriptions and small logistical things that needed untangling. I did all of it without contacting her, just notified her by text that I was making the change and that she should make any necessary adjustments on her end. She responded to each of those texts as if they were openings for conversation. I treated them as confirmations. Yes, received, I would reply. That was all. Around 3 weeks out, I started hearing through the grapevine that she was struggling. The freelance work hadn't picked back up. Corey was gone. The social situation was uncomfortable because many of the mutual friends had been at the party or heard the full story, and nobody was particularly eager to take her side publicly. She had positioned herself for a very long time as someone who was slightly wronged by the world, and that performance was hard to maintain after a room full of people watched her admit what she had done. I won't pretend I didn't feel something when I heard that, but it wasn't satisfaction exactly. It was more like recognition, like watching an outcome make sense. She reached out one more time about 6 weeks after the party, a longer message this time. She said she knew she had hurt me badly. She said she had been doing a lot of thinking, and she understood now that some of the things she'd told herself about the relationship weren't fair to either of us. She said she had been scared for most of the relationship, scared of being left, scared of not being enough, scared that my stability made her invisible. And instead of dealing with that fear, she had just acted on it in destructive ways. She said going off the pill was the worst of it. She said she knew that. She said she didn't fully understand herself why she had done it, except that she had been so afraid of losing me that she had tried to manufacture something that would make me stay, and she could see now how violating that was. She said she wasn't asking for me back. She said she just wanted me to know she was sorry in a real way, not a defensive way. I read it twice. I sat with it for a day. I wrote back one thing. I said, "I believe you mean that. I also believe the damage is permanent. Take care of yourself." I didn't hear from her again. I've had a lot of time since then to think about where I went wrong. Not in the sense of blaming myself for what she did. She made her choices and I didn't cause them. But there were things I could have done differently. I could have listened to Marcus sooner. I could have held my ground more firmly when she kept reframing my boundaries as control. I could have had the conversation about money and what it meant to both of us before it became this festering thing between us. I made myself smaller to keep her comfortable. I kept thinking that if I was just patient enough, understanding enough, present enough, the version of the relationship I had signed up for would eventually show up. It didn't. Because the version I had signed up for had been a fiction she offered me at the beginning and never intended to deliver. The part that haunts me most is the pill thing. Not just because of the practical stakes, though yes, a child in that situation would have been catastrophic for everyone, including the child, but because of what it tells me about how she saw me. I was someone to be managed, someone to be maneuvered into place. She never quite saw me as a person with an equal right to make decisions about my own life. She just saw me as a variable she needed to control in the equation of her own security. And she called that love. I'm not sure she was entirely wrong. I'm not sure she knew how to tell the difference. Marcus and I still hang out almost every week. He's the most constant thing in my life, and I don't take that for granted. A few months after the party, he said something I've thought about a lot. He said, "The good news is you found out what she was before anything irreversible happened." I said, "The pregnancy scare." He said, "Exactly. That was the version where nothing was permanent. You dodged something." He was right. I know he was right. Some days that thought is a relief. Other days, the timeline of it, how close it came, how much longer it might have gone on if it had worked, that part still sits heavy. But I'm not standing on crumbling ground anymore. I know what that feels like now, and I know the difference between the stability of a real foundation and the feeling of something just holding long enough for you not to notice it going. That's worth something. Learning that was painful and slow and humiliating in ways I didn't expect, but I did learn it, and I won't unlearn it. I don't know what Dara's life looks like now. I don't check. I've heard occasional fragments through people we used to share, but I don't seek them out, and I don't linger on what I happen to hear. I genuinely hope she figures out whatever it is she was running from when she was with me. I hope she finds a way to be in a relationship without making the other person the solution to her fear. That's not my problem to solve, and it never really was, even when I thought it was. The thing I came to understand eventually, and this took longer than I'd like to admit, is that the relationship ended the moment she decided it was okay to lie about the pill. Everything after that was just time passing on borrowed ground. She had already made her decision about what I was worth as a partner. The cheating, the manipulation, the reframing, all of that was downstream of that original choice. Once she decided that managing me was acceptable, everything else followed. And once I understood that, the grief became simpler. I wasn't grieving the relationship I'd had. I was grieving the one I had believed I was in. Those are two very different things, and knowing the difference is how you stop mourning something that was never actually there. I'm in a better place now. Not in a everything is great, I learned a lesson and moved on kind of way, in a quieter way, in a this is what solid ground actually feels like way. That's enough for right now. That's genuinely enough.